The dim light of the underground bunker cast long shadows across the faces of the two men seated at the table. Theo Adler, the seasoned Mossad agent, leaned forward, his eyes intense. "We've received credible intel that a rogue faction within the Russian government is planning a devastating nuclear attack on the West. This cannot be allowed to happen." CIA operative Natasha Ivanov felt a chill run down her spine. She had been brought in on this operation for her expertise in high-stakes international crises, but the stakes had just been raised exponentially. "How can we stop them? We're talking about a global catastrophe in the making." Adler's expression was grim. "I've been working with a source deep within the Kremlin. He's given us the details on the plan, the targets, the launch codes, even the exact timing of the attack." He paused, meeting Ivanov's gaze. "But we have to move fast. We're talking about less than 48 hours before the missiles are fired." Ivanov felt a rush of adrenaline. This was the kind of challenge she lived for, a race against time to prevent unspeakable tragedy. But the obstacles were daunting. "Can we trust your source? What if this is all a trap?" Adler's jaw tightened. "My source is impeccable, but you're right, we can't take anything for granted. We'll need to verify the intel independently, and fast. I've already alerted my team to start cross-checking everything." Ivanov nodded, her mind racing. "Okay, I'll get my people on this immediately. We'll need to coordinate closely. This is going to take the full resources of both our agencies to pull off." The two agents shook hands, an unspoken understanding passing between them. They both knew the stakes. Failure was not an option. As they parted ways, Ivanov couldn't shake the ominous feeling that time was running out. Over the next 36 hours, Ivanov and Adler's teams worked around the clock, verifying Adler's intel and devising a plan of attack. The information checked out, and the threat was very real. Now it was a matter of executing a flawless operation to neutralize the missile launch before it was too late. The final pieces fell into place just hours before the projected strike time. Ivanov and Adler, along with a small, highly trained team, infiltrated the heavily guarded Russian missile silo. In a tense, high-stakes confrontation, they managed to disable the launch sequence just seconds before the missiles were to be fired. As they emerged from the silo, Ivanov and Adler shared a look of profound relief. They had averted a global catastrophe, but both knew the danger was far from over. The rogue Russian faction behind the plot would not take this defeat lightly. Sure enough, within hours, they found themselves in a deadly game of cat and mouse, evading assassination attempts and narrowly escaping ambushes as they tried to get the critical intel back to their respective agencies. It was a harrowing journey, but in the end, Ivanov and Adler prevailed, delivering the intel that would ultimately dismantle the conspiracy. In the aftermath, the two agents stood side by side, surveying the damage. Thousands of lives had been saved, but the cost had been high. They knew this was only the beginning. The world was a dangerous place, and vigilance was paramount. But for now, they could take solace in the knowledge that their partnership had made all the difference. As they parted ways, Ivanov couldn't help but reflect on the power of a single critical tip, a tip that had set in motion a series of events that had quite literally saved the world. It was a testament to the importance of international cooperation and the relentless pursuit of the truth, no matter the personal cost. The air was thick with tension as Theo Adler and Natasha Ivanov parted ways, the weight of their recent triumph still palpable. But their work was far from over. The shadowy cabal behind the failed nuclear attack would not take their defeat lightly. Their target was Yuri Volkov, a brilliant but ruthless Russian oligarch with deep ties to the Kremlin. Volkov had been the mastermind behind the nuclear plot, using his vast wealth and influence to orchestrate the rogue faction's efforts. His ambitions, however, went far beyond a single strike. In the years since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Volkov had methodically built a sprawling business empire, accumulating immense political and economic power. But his true goal was to restore Russia to its former glory by any means necessary. He had been funneling resources into a clandestine project to develop a new generation of advanced nuclear weapons, aimed at crippling the West and establishing Moscow's dominance. The geopolitical stakes were staggering. If Volkov succeeded, it would shift the balance of power on the global stage, potentially sparking a new arms race and escalating tensions between Russia and the US-led NATO alliance to a breaking point. The ripple effects could destabilize entire regions, leading to unthinkable bloodshed and upheaval. Adler and Ivanov knew they had to act quickly. Volkov's network was vast and well protected, with deep roots in the Russian security apparatus.
Any misstep could jeopardize the mission and put countless lives at risk. They would need to coordinate a complex, multi-layered operation to infiltrate Volkov's stronghold and neutralize the threat. The first step was to gather intelligence. Adler's Mossad team had been trailing Volkov's associates, piecing together the intricate web of his operations. Meanwhile, Ivanov's CIA operatives were working to identify potential vulnerabilities and pressure points within Volkov's organization. As the two agents pooled their resources, a clearer picture began to emerge. Volkov was based in a heavily fortified compound outside of Moscow, guarded by an elite private security force.
He rarely ventured outside, relying on a network of trusted lieutenants to manage his far-flung business interests. Gaining access to the compound would be a daunting challenge. But Adler and Ivanov had a plan. Drawing on their respective agencies' expertise in covert operations, they would assemble a small, highly trained team to infiltrate the compound and neutralize Volkov. The team would need to navigate a maze of security measures, eliminate any resistance, and apprehend Volkov without triggering a wider conflict. It was an audacious scheme, fraught with risk, but the consequences of failure were unthinkable. Volkov's nuclear ambitions had to be stopped, no matter the cost. As the two agents finalized the operational details, they knew they were up against a formidable adversary. Volkov was a ruthless, calculating individual, driven by an unwavering vision of Russian supremacy. He would not go down without a fight. The stakes had never been higher. The fate of nations hung in the balance, and Adler and Ivanov were the last line of defense. With their reputations and careers on the line, they were determined to succeed, no matter what it took. As the plan took shape, the two agents shared a meaningful glance, both understanding the gravity of the mission before them. They knew that failure was not an option. The world was watching, and the future of global stability rested on their shoulders. With a renewed sense of purpose, Adler and Ivanov set out to confront their most formidable adversary yet, ready to put everything on the line to prevent the unthinkable. The clock was ticking, and the fate of the world hung in the balance. The infiltration. Teo Adler and Natasha Ivanov huddled over the blueprints of Yuri Volkov's heavily fortified compound, their expressions intense. They had spent weeks meticulously planning every step of the daring operation, leaving nothing to chance. "All right, let's go over the final plan one more time," Adler said, his voice low and authoritative. "Natasha, your team will handle the initial infiltration." Ivanov nodded. "My operatives have been embedded in Moscow for the last month, establishing cover identities and preparing the groundwork." She pointed to the schematic. "They'll approach the compound posing as catering staff delivering supplies for a private function Volkov is hosting." Adler's eyes narrowed. "And once inside?" "They'll neutralize the guards at the service entrance and secure a foothold within the compound. That's when your team moves in." Adler's lips twitched in a grim smile. "We'll be waiting nearby, ready to strike. My men have spent weeks perfecting their disguises. They'll blend in seamlessly with Volkov's inner circle." Ivanov studied the plan, her brow furrowed. "The timing will be crucial. We have to take Volkov down before he can react and trigger the launch sequence." "My source confirms the nuclear warheads are housed in a secure bunker beneath the compound," Adler said. "Once we've neutralized the threat, we'll need to move quickly to secure the launch codes and prevent any retaliation." Ivanov let out a long breath. "This is it then. No margin for error." Adler reached across the table, placing his hand on hers. "We're ready for this, Natasha. We've trained for months, and our teams are the best in the business." Ivanov gave him a resolute nod. "Then let's do this." 2 days later, a sleek black sedan glided through the streets of Moscow, its passengers maintaining a carefully cultivated air of indifference. In the back seat, Teo Adler and 3 of his Mossad operatives sat silently, their features obscured by the tinted windows. Adler's team had undergone an extensive transformation. Gone were their typical intelligence agent attire, replaced by the impeccable suits and polished accessories of Volkov's inner circle. Their hair and facial features had been expertly altered, courtesy of the CIA's top disguise artists. As the car approached the heavily guarded compound, Adler straightened his tie, his eyes narrowing. "Remember, stay calm and keep your wits about you. The slightest misstep could blow the entire operation." His team nodded in acknowledgement, their expressions schooled into practiced indifference. The sedan was waved through the gates without incident, and Adler's team disembarked, seamlessly blending into the stream of guests arriving for Volkov's private function. They moved with the confidence of men who belonged, their every gesture and mannerism carefully rehearsed.
Across town, Natasha Ivanov's operatives were already in position, posing as catering staff and delivering trays of hors d'oeuvres to the compound's service entrance. As they were waved through, one of the agents subtly palmed a small device, surreptitiously disabling the security cameras. The plan was unfolding with precision. Ivanov watched from a nearby safe house, her heart pounding. Now it was up to Adler's team to infiltrate the compound and locate Volkov. Inside the lavish event, Adler and his men mingled effortlessly, engaging in idle chatter and sipping champagne. Their eyes constantly scanned the room, searching for any sign of their target. Suddenly, a hush fell over the crowd as Yuri Volkov himself entered the hall, flanked by a team of burly bodyguards. Adler felt a surge of adrenaline. This was their moment. He discreetly signaled his team, and they moved with practiced precision, converging on Volkov. The Infiltration, Chapter 2. Adler's team moved with practiced precision, converging on Volkov as he strode through the opulent hall. The Russian oligarch was flanked by his burly bodyguards, but the Mossad agents closed in swiftly, their movements fluid and coordinated. In one smooth motion, Adler stepped forward, his hand reaching into his jacket.
The bodyguards tensed, reaching for their weapons, but Adler's voice rang out, commanding and authoritative. "Yuri Volkov, you are under arrest." Volkov's eyes widened in shock, but only for a moment. Then his features twisted into a snarl of rage. "You fools," he spat. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Adler remained unflinching, his gun trained on Volkov's chest. "Stand down, or we will use force." The bodyguards hesitated, their gazes darting between Volkov and the Mossad agents, who had now formed a tight perimeter around their target. Across town, Natasha Ivanov watched the unfolding events on a bank of monitors, her heart pounding. "Come on, Teo," she murmured. "Don't let him get away." Volkov's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. In one swift move, he whirled around, shoving past his guards and making a break for the exit. Adler's team surged forward, but the Russian oligarch was fast, darting through the panicked crowd. "Don't let him escape," Adler barked, his team in hot pursuit. Volkov burst through a set of double doors, his expensive loafers pounding against the marble floor as he ran. He could hear the shouts of the Mossad agents behind him, their footsteps gaining ground. Desperate, he wrenched open a heavy door, spilling out into the dimly lit corridors of the compound's lower levels. Adler and his men followed close behind, their weapons drawn. They knew Volkov was heading for the secure bunker where the nuclear warheads were stored. If he managed to reach the launch codes, it would be too late. Rounding a corner, Volkov spotted a pair of armed guards and let out a frantic shout. "Stop them! Kill them all!" The guards raised their weapons, but Adler's team was faster. In a hail of gunfire, the guards went down, their bodies crumbling to the floor. Volkov cursed under his breath, his eyes darting around frantically. He could hear the pounding of footsteps behind him, and he knew he had to move quickly. Spotting a maintenance hatch in the wall, he wrenched it open and dove inside, disappearing into the darkness. Adler and his men didn't hesitate. They followed Volkov into the cramped, winding tunnel, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The air was thick with the acrid scent of spent cartridges, and the sound of their heavy breathing echoed off the concrete walls. "He's trying to reach the bunker," Adler growled. "We can't let him get there." They pressed on, the narrow confines of the tunnel forcing them to move single file. Adler could feel the seconds ticking away, his mind racing with the urgency of the situation. Volkov had to be stopped, no matter what. Suddenly, a shape emerged from the shadows up ahead, and Adler recognized the outline of Volkov's form. "There he is," he shouted, raising his weapon. Volkov whirled around, his eyes wild with desperation. In his hands, he clutched a small device, his finger poised over a button. "One more step, and I'll detonate the charges," he snarled. Adler froze, his breath catching in his throat. If Volkov triggered the explosives, the entire compound would be reduced to rubble, burying them all. The stakes had just been raised to an unthinkable level. Across town, Natasha Ivanova watched the events unfold on the monitors, her face etched with worry. "Teo, what's happening?" she murmured, her fingers tightening around the edge of the console. Adler's team held their position, their weapons trained on Volkov. The Russian oligarch's eyes darted between them, his expression a mix of rage and fear. "You have nowhere to run, Volkov," Adler said, his voice low and measured. "Give it up." Volkov's lips curled into a twisted grin. "Oh, I don't think so." He pressed the button, and the world erupted in a deafening roar. The aftermath. A deafening explosion rocked the compound, the force of the blast rippling through the narrow maintenance tunnel. Adler and his team were thrown off their feet, the air thick with choking dust and debris. As the rumbling subsided, Adler coughed, his eyes stinging. "Volkov," he growled, his voice hoarse. He scrambled to his feet, adrenaline surging through his veins. The tunnel was in shambles, the concrete walls cracked and crumbling.
Adler's men were slowly picking themselves up, their faces etched with shock and disbelief. But Volkov was nowhere to be seen. Adler felt a chill run down his spine. "We have to get out of here, now," he shouted, his mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. The team quickly made their way back through the rubble-strewn tunnel, fighting their way towards the surface. As they emerged into the relative safety of the compound upper levels, the full scale of the devastation became clear. Smoke billowed from the ruins of the lower floors, the sound of panicked shouts and sirens filling the air. Adler's heart sank as he realized that Volkov's explosive trap had been just the beginning. Across town, Natasha Ivanova watched the unfolding chaos on the monitors, her face a mask of horror. "My God," she whispered, her hands gripping the console. The operation had gone horribly wrong, and now the consequences were spilling out into the world. Adler burst into the safe house, his clothes tattered and his face streaked with grime. "Volkov set off explosives in the compound," he gasped. "The entire lower level is gone, and I don't know how many casualties there are." Ivanova's eyes widened. "But the nuclear warheads?" Adler's expression darkened. "I don't know. Volkov must have set a trap for us. We have to assume the worst." Ivanova's mind raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of possibilities. "If the warheads have been compromised, this could be a global catastrophe. We need to alert the authorities, coordinate an evacuation, and mobilize every resource we have to contain the fallout." Adler nodded, his jaw set with determination. "I'll get my team on it. We need to move fast before the situation spirals out of control."
As the two agents sprang into action, the gravity of the situation began to sink in. Volkov's ruthless gambit had succeeded in shattering their carefully laid plans, and now the fate of millions hung in the balance. Across the world, news of the explosion at Volkov's compound spread like wildfire. Governments went on high alert, activating emergency protocols and dispatching response teams to the scene. The specter of a nuclear disaster loomed large, and the stakes had never been higher. In the chaos, Volkov had managed to slip away, his whereabouts unknown. Adler and Ivanov knew that the rogue oligarch would not stop until he had achieved his twisted vision of restoring Russia's global dominance, even if it meant plunging the world into nuclear war. The next few hours were a frantic blur of activity, as the two agents coordinated with their respective agencies and international partners to assess the situation and mount a response. Evacuation orders were issued, hazardous material teams were dispatched, and a massive manhunt was launched to track down Volkov and his associates. As the dust began to settle, the full scale of the disaster became clear. The explosion had breached the secure bunker, compromising the nuclear warheads stored there. Radioactive contamination was spreading, and the threat of a meltdown loomed large. Thousands were dead or injured, and the economic and political fallout would be felt for years to come. Adler and Ivanov stood side by side, their faces etched with a mixture of grief and determination. They had failed to stop Volkov, and the consequences of that failure were now unfolding before their eyes, but they knew that giving up was not an option. "We have to find him, Natasha," Adler said, his voice low and resolute, "before he can carry out his plan and plunge the world into nuclear war." Ivanov nodded, her eyes narrowing. "This isn't over. Volkov may have won this round, but we're not going to let him win the war." As the two agents prepared to embark on a global manhunt, the weight of their responsibility felt heavier than ever. The future of the world hung in the balance, and they were the last line of defense against the looming darkness. The final confrontation was inevitable, and the stakes had never been higher. Adler and Ivanov knew that the outcome would shape the course of history, and they were determined to do whatever it took to ensure that their side emerged victorious. The fate of nations rested on their shoulders, and failure was not an option. The final chapter. In the tense days that followed the devastating explosion at Yuri Volkov's compound, the world held its breath. The compromise of the nuclear warheads had triggered a global crisis of epic proportions, with nations scrambling to contain the fallout, both literally and figuratively. Adler and Ivanov worked tirelessly, coordinating with their respective agencies and international partners to track down Volkov and neutralize the threat. But the elusive oligarch had vanished, leaving a trail of destruction and chaos in his wake. As the full scale of the disaster became clear, the geopolitical ramifications were staggering. The breach of the nuclear bunker had sent shockwaves through the global security landscape, shattering the delicate balance of power and igniting fears of a potential arms race. Tensions between Russia and the West reached a fever pitch, with accusations and counter-accusations flying as each side sought to deflect blame and assert its dominance. The specter of all-out war loomed large, and the world teetered on the edge of a precipice.
In the aftermath, global leaders convened emergency summits, desperately trying to find a path forward. Adler and Ivanov were at the forefront of these high-stakes negotiations, using their expertise and intelligence to navigate the treacherous political landscape. Through painstaking efforts and hard-won compromises, a fragile consensus began to emerge. The international community would work together to secure the compromised nuclear materials, contain the spread of radioactive contamination, and bring Volkov to justice. But the damage had already been done. The public's faith in the ability of governments and security agencies to protect them had been shattered, and the resulting social and political upheaval was seismic. Across the globe, anti-establishment movements gained momentum, fueled by a growing distrust of the political elite and a sense of vulnerability. In Russia, Volkov's supporters rallied around the banner of national pride, casting him as a martyr and a symbol of Russian defiance against the West. The fallout from the Volkov affair reverberated for years, reshaping the global geopolitical landscape in profound and lasting ways. The incident served as a stark reminder of the fragility of the nuclear order and the dire consequences of unchecked ambition and unchecked power. In the years that followed, the world grappled with the aftermath, working tirelessly to rebuild trust, strengthen international cooperation, and develop new safeguards against the threat of nuclear terrorism. Adler and Ivanov remained at the forefront of these efforts, using their expertise and intelligence to shape the course of history. Their partnership, forged in the crucible of crisis, had become a symbol of the power of international cooperation and the uncompromising pursuit of justice. Their actions had not only averted a global catastrophe, but had also laid the groundwork for a new era of multilateral security cooperation, one that would be essential in navigating the complex and ever-evolving threats of the modern world. As the dust settled, Adler and Ivanov stood side by side, surveying the changed landscape.
The price they had paid was high, both personally and professionally, but they knew that their efforts had made a difference. The world was a safer place because of what they had accomplished, and they took solace in that knowledge. In the years that followed, their story would become the stuff of legend, inspiring generations of intelligence agents and policymakers to follow in their footsteps. The Volkov affair would be remembered as a pivotal moment in history, a turning point that had reshaped the global order and ushered in a new era of heightened vigilance and cooperation. For Adler and Ivanov, the mission had never been about personal glory or recognition. It had been about protecting the innocent, safeguarding the future, and standing up to those who would seek to exploit the world's vulnerabilities for their own twisted ambitions. As they parted ways, their handshake was more than just a gesture of camaraderie. It was a silent promise, a vow to continue the fight, no matter the cost. For the stakes were too high, and the consequences of failure too dire to ever let their guard down. The world would never be the same, but in the end, it would be a better place, thanks to the courage and determination of two extraordinary individuals who had risked everything to prevent the unthinkable.